The helicopter's rotors cut through the desert air like angry wasps as it descended toward the forward operating base. Inside the cramped medical bay, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos worked with steady hands despite the aircraft's violent shaking. Blood covered her uniform, but none of it was hers. The wounded Navy SEAL lying on the stretcher before her had taken shrapnel to his leg during a firefight that had gone sideways fast. "Stay with me." "Thompson," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. She applied pressure to the wound while checking his vitals. The SEAL's eyes fluttered open, confused and disoriented from blood loss. "Doc," he mumbled through gritted teeth. "The others?" "Everyone made it out," Maria assured him, though she knew 2 more SEALs were in critical condition in another bird flying parallel to theirs. The mission had been a disaster from the start. What should have been a simple reconnaissance operation had turned into a 12-hour firefight when their position was compromised. As the helicopter touched down, Maria was already preparing for the rush. The base's medical facility wasn't much to look at, a collection of prefabricated buildings, surrounded by sandbags and concrete barriers. But it was equipped with everything she needed to save lives, and that was all that mattered to her. The moment the aircraft's doors opened, Maria was moving. She had been a combat medic for 8 years, serving multiple tours across Afghanistan and Iraq. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often fooled people into thinking she was just another support personnel. They couldn't have been more wrong. "I need 2 units of O-negative and Prep OR2, she called out to the medical team waiting at the landing zone. The base's chief medical officer, Colonel Richardson, nodded approvingly as he watched Maria take charge of the situation with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Thompson was rushed into surgery, while Maria quickly cleaned up and prepared for the next wave of casualties. The other helicopter had radioed that they were 5 minutes out with 2 urgent cases. She used those precious minutes to restock her supplies and mentally prepare for what was coming. The second helicopter brought in Lieutenant Jake Morrison and Petty Officer First Class David Chun. Both members of SEAL Team 6, Morrison had taken a bullet to the chest that had miraculously missed his heart by inches. Chun had suffered severe burns from an improvised explosive device that had detonated too close to their position. Maria worked on Chun while another medic handled Morrison. The burns covered 30% of his body, and she knew he would need immediate evacuation to a specialized burn unit in Germany. As she carefully cleaned and dressed his wounds, Chun grabbed her wrist with his uninjured hand. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. Maria looked into his eyes and saw something she had seen too, many times before, the look of a warrior who thought he might not make it home. "You're going to be fine," she told him firmly. "I've seen worse, and they all went home to their families." It wasn't entirely true. She had lost patients before, and each death haunted her. But Chun needed hope more than he needed brutal honesty. And Maria had learned that sometimes a medic's most powerful tool wasn't medicine, but words of encouragement. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, paperwork, and coordination with evacuation teams. By the time the sun set over the desert, all 3 SEALs were stable and either in surgery or being prepared for transport to better-equipped facilities. Maria finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped outside the medical facility and looked up at the scar-filled sky. The desert was surprisingly peaceful when it wasn't trying to kill you. She pulled out a worn photograph from her pocket, a picture of her younger brother Miguel in his army uniform, taken just weeks before he was killed by a roadside bomb in Fallujah. Miguel's death had changed everything for Maria. She had been studying to become a nurse back in San Antonio when the news came. Within 6 months, she had enlisted and volunteered for combat medic training. If she couldn't save her brother, she would spend the rest of her military career saving other people's brothers and sisters. "Sergeant Santos?" Colonel Richardson's voice interrupted her thoughts. She quickly tucked the photograph away and turned to face him. "Yes, sir?" "Outstanding work today. Morrison and Chen are both going to make full recoveries because of your quick thinking." The colonel paused, studying her face in the dim light cast by the facility's exterior lights. "I'm putting you in for a commendation. What you did out there was exceptional." Maria felt uncomfortable with praise. She had simply done her job, nothing more. "Thank you, sir, but I was just doing what any medic would do." Richardson smiled. "That's where you're wrong, Santos. Not every medic would have kept Chun stable during that helicopter ride. The flight crew said you performed a minor surgical procedure while the bird was taking enemy fire? That takes nerves of steel." As the colonel walked away, Maria realized she hadn't even noticed the enemy fire during the flight. She had been so focused on her patient that the sound of bullets hitting the helicopter's hull had barely registered. It was a strange thing to discover about yourself, that in moments of crisis, everything else faded away except the life in your hands. She was about to head back inside when she heard the distinctive sound of another helicopter approaching. This one was different, larger and flying with the urgency that meant more casualties were inbound. Maria sighed and headed back to the medical bay. The war didn't stop for rest or reflection. As she prepared for the next wave of wounded soldiers, Maria couldn't help but think about the men she had saved that day. Thompson would probably be back on duty within a few months. Morrison might take longer, but he would recover. Chun faced a difficult road ahead, but he would survive. These thoughts sustained her through the long nights and endless stream of casualties. Each life saved was a small victory against the chaos and brutality of war. It wasn't glamorous work, and it rarely came with recognition or glory. But for Maria, it was enough to know that somewhere, families would remain whole because she had been there when it mattered most. The approaching helicopter grew louder, and Maria could see its lights cutting through the darkness. She checked her supplies one more time and took a deep breath. Whatever was coming next, she would be ready. She always was. The incoming helicopter carried members of SEAL Team 7 who had been ambushed during a high-value target raid near the Pakistani border. As the aircraft touched down, Maria could see through the open doors that this was going to be different. The team leader, a grizzled Master Chief named Rodriguez, was walking wounded but helping carry a stretcher. His face was grim as he locked eyes with Maria. "We've got a bad one, Doc," Rodriguez called out over the rotor noise. "Sniper got Barnes in the neck. He's been unconscious for 20 minutes. Maria's heart rate spiked as she saw the patient. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Barnes was barely breathing, and blood had soaked through the makeshift pressure bandage around his throat. She knew immediately that this was a race against time. Neck wounds were unpredictable. Sometimes they looked worse than they were, but other times they were fatal within minutes. "Get him to Trauma Bay 1 now," Maria shouted, running alongside the stretcher as the team rushed Barnes inside. She began her assessment while they moved, checking his airway and pulse. His breathing was labored but steady, which gave her hope that the bullet hadn't severed his carotid artery completely. Inside the trauma bay, Maria worked with the focused intensity that had earned her respect throughout the medical corps. She inserted in 4-line while simultaneously examining the wound. The bullet had entered just below Barnes' jaw and exited through the side of his neck, somehow missing the major blood vessels by millimeters. "He's lucky," she murmured to the assisting nurse. "A few degrees in any direction and he'd be gone already." As she worked to stabilize Barnes, Maria became aware that several SEALs had gathered outside the trauma bay. Through the glass partition, she could see them watching her every move. It wasn't unusual for teammates to wait while their brothers received medical care, but something about their expressions was different. They weren't just concerned, they were studying her with the intense focus that special operations, soldiers reserved for threats and assets. Master. Chief Rodriguez entered the trauma bay after Maria had gotten Barnes stable and ready for surgery. The older SEAL's weathered face showed signs of exhaustion and stress, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "The doc. I need to ask you something," Rodriguez said quietly, positioning himself so the other SEALs outside couldn't hear. "Barnes is more than just another operator. He's our communications specialist, and he's carrying information that certain people would kill to get their hands on." Maria looked up from her patient, confused. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that if word gets out that Barnes is here and vulnerable, we might have visitors who aren't interested in his medical care. Rodriguez paused, weighing his words carefully. I need to know if I can trust you to keep this quiet. Master Chief, I don't discuss my patients with anyone except medical personnel. That's basic protocol. Maria felt a surge of irritation. Did this man really think she would gossip about wounded soldiers? Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But there's something else you should know. The mission that went wrong today, it wasn't a coincidence. Someone leaked our operational details to the enemy. We walked into a trap. The implications hit Maria immediately. If there was a security breach that had compromised the SEAL teams, then Barnes might indeed be in danger even here on the base. She looked down at her unconscious patient, whose life was now her responsibility in more ways than one. What do you need from me? She asked. Just do what you do, Doc, save his life. But if anyone comes around asking questions about Barnes or wanting access to him, you find me first. Rodriguez handed her a small communication device. This connects directly to my radio. Any problems, you call? After Rodriguez left, Maria continued preparing Barnes for surgery. The bullet had caused significant tissue damage, and while it had missed the vital structures, there was still a risk of infection and nerve damage. As she worked, she found herself constantly glancing toward the trauma bay's entrance, wondering if Rodriguez's concerns were justified, or if the stress of combat had made him paranoid. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Maria assisted the base's chief surgeon, Dr. Patterson, as they carefully repaired the damaged tissue and blood vessels in Barnes' neck. The operation was successful, but Barnes would need weeks of recovery time before returning to duty. When Maria finally emerged from the operating room, she was surprised to find Rodriguez and 2 other SEALs still waiting in the hallway. It was nearly 3 in the morning and most of the base was asleep. How is he? Rodriguez asked immediately. The surgery went well. No permanent damage to the vocal cords or major nerves. He'll have some scarring, but he should make a full recovery. Maria pulled off her surgical cap, exhausted from the long procedure. When will he be conscious? Probably within the next few hours. But he'll need to rest. No interrogations or mission briefings for at least 48 hours. Maria gave Rodriguez a stern look. I mean it, Master Chief. His body needs time to heal. Rodriguez nodded, but Maria could see he was already calculating how quickly he could debrief Barnes about the failed mission. She understood the urgency if there really was a security leak. Every hour of delay could put more lives at risk. As she walked toward her quarters for a few hours of sleep, Maria reflected on the strange turn her deployment had taken. When she had volunteered for this assignment, she had expected to treat routine injuries and illnesses with the occasional combat casualty. She hadn't anticipated becoming involved in whatever dangerous situation the SEAL teams had stumbled into. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Maria turned to see one of the SEALs from Rodriguez's team approaching. He was younger than the others, probably in his mid-20s, with the lean build and alert posture that marked him as special operations. Sergeant Santos, he said quietly. I'm Petty Officer Williams. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Barnes tonight. He's a good friend. Just doing my job, Maria replied, though she appreciated the gesture. Many soldiers never bothered to thank medical personnel, taking their care for granted. Master Chief probably didn't tell you everything about Barnes, Williams continued, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. He's got a wife and 2 little girls back home. The youngest just turned 3 last month. Maria felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She tried not to think about the families of her patients, knowing that emotional attachment could compromise her medical judgment. But sometimes the human stories were impossible to ignore. He's going to be fine, she assured Williams. The injury looks worse than it is. Williams nodded, but his expression remained troubled. It's just that we've lost too many good people lately. And this mission tonight, it felt wrong from the start. Like we were being set up? Before Maria could respond, Williams melted back into the shadows with the silent movement that special operations soldiers learned early in their training. She stood alone in the quiet corridor, wondering what she had gotten herself involved in and whether the worst was yet to come. The next morning brought an unusual visitor to the medical facility. Colonel James Mitchell from Naval Special Warfare Command had flown in specifically to check on the wounded SEALs. Maria was making her rounds when she noticed the tall, imposing officer speaking quietly with Dr. Patterson near the intensive care unit. Mitchell had the bearing of a career military officer who had seen extensive combat. His uniform was crisp despite the early morning flight, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the medical facility. When Dr. Patterson pointed toward Maria, she knew the conversation was about to include her. "Sergeant Santos," Dr. Patterson called out. "Colonel Mitchell would like to speak with you about the patients from yesterday's operation." As Maria approached, she noticed that Master Chief Rodriguez had also appeared, seemingly from nowhere. The SDAL's presence suggested this wasn't a routine visit from a superior officer. "Sergeant, I've been reading the medical reports from yesterday's casualties," Colonel Mitchell began without preamble. "Impressive work, especially considering the circumstances. Dr. Patterson tells me you've been handling the bulk of trauma cases for the past 6 months." "Yes, sir. We've had a busy deployment." Maria wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but she sensed it was important. "I'm particularly interested in your assessment of Petty Officer Barnes' condition. When do you expect him to be fit for duty?" Maria glanced at Rodriguez, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Physically, he should be ready for light duty in about 2 weeks. Full operational status might take a month, depending on how well he heals." Mitchell frowned. "That's longer than we hoped. Barnes has critical information about the mission parameters and enemy positions. We need him debriefed as soon as possible. With respect, sir, rushing his recovery could cause permanent damage. The throat injury was severe, and pushing too hard too soon could affect his ability to communicate effectively." Maria kept her voice professional but firm. She had learned long ago that standing up for her patients' well-being sometimes required challenging superior officers. "Sergeant Santos is right," Dr. Patterson interjected. "I've reviewed the surgical notes. Any undue stress on the repair work could result in complications that would sideline Barnes for months instead of weeks." Colonel Mitchell studied Maria with the same intensity she had seen in Rodriguez and the other SEALs. It was the look of a predator evaluating potential prey, except she sensed he was measuring her competence rather than her vulnerability. "Master Chief Rodriguez has briefed me on his concerns about operational security," Mitchell said finally. "He believes there may be a compromised element in our intelligence chain. If he's correct, Barnes could be targeted while he's recovering." The word sent a chill down Maria's spine. The idea that enemy agents might try to infiltrate the base to get to her patient was something she had never considered. Her medical training had prepared her for combat injuries, infectious diseases, and natural disasters, but not for protecting patients from assassination attempts. "What are you asking of me, sir?" she said. "I'm asking if you're prepared to take responsibility for Barnes' security as well as his medical care. Master Chief Rodriguez has requested that Barnes be placed under your direct supervision for the duration of his recovery. You would essentially become his personal physician and bodyguard." Maria looked at Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly. "The thing is, Doc, you're the only person on this base who's proven she can keep Barnes alive under pressure. Yesterday, when that helicopter was taking fire and you were working on Chun, you never even flinched. That's the kind of person I want watching my man's back." The weight of the responsibility was overwhelming. Maria had signed up to save lives, not to become involved in intelligence operations and counter-espionage. But looking at Rodriguez's weathered face, she could see the genuine concern for his teammates' welfare. "If I agreed to this, what exactly would it involve?" Colonel Mitchell pulled out a tablet and showed her a detailed security protocol. "Barnes would be moved to a secure wing of the medical facility. You would be his primary caregiver, with access restricted to essential medical personnel only. You would also be briefed on basic security procedures and given communication equipment to contact Rodriguez or my staff if any unusual situations arise." As Maria read through the protocol, She realized this was far beyond anything she had been trained for. The document outlined procedures for identifying potential threats, securing patient areas, and even protocols for emergency evacuation if the base came under attack. "This is way outside my expertise," she said honestly. "I'm a medic, not a security specialist." "That's exactly why it might work," Rodriguez said. "Professional security details are obvious to anyone with training. But a dedicated medic caring for her patient? That's invisible. No one would suspect that the small female sergeant is actually running a protection detail." The plan was risky and unconventional, but Maria could see the logic. Her medical duties would provide perfect cover for keeping Barnes under constant observation. And if there really was a security threat, her presence might be the only thing standing between Barnes and a potential assassin. What about the other medical staff? Dr. Patterson, the nurses? They'll be told that Barnes requires intensive monitoring due to complications from his surgery, Colonel Mitchell explained. "Only you, Dr. Patterson, and the base commander will know the real reason for the security measures." Maria thought about Barnes lying unconscious in the ICU, unaware that his life might be in danger from sources other than his combat injuries. She remembered what Williams had told her about Barnes' family, a wife and 2 young daughters waiting for him to come home. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." Rodriguez smiled for the first time since she had met him. "I knew you were solid, Doc." Colonel Mitchell handed her the communication device Rodriguez had given her the night before, along with a small earpiece. "This connects you directly to our secure network. Any concerns, day or night, you report them immediately." As the officers prepared to leave, Dr. Patterson pulled Maria aside. "Are you sure about this? What they're asking goes well beyond normal medical duties." Maria looked through the glass partition at Barnes, who was beginning to stir as the anesthesia wore off. His neck was bandaged heavily, and monitors tracked his vital signs. He looked vulnerable and helpless, dependent entirely on the medical staff for his survival. "Someone has to do it," she said simply. "Might as well be me." What Maria didn't know was that Colonel Mitchell and Rodriguez had spent considerable time researching her background before making this request. Her military record showed consistent excellence under pressure, but more importantly, it revealed something else that made her perfect for this assignment. Maria Santos had secrets of her own, combat experience that wasn't reflected in her official medic classification. Experience that made her far more dangerous than she appeared. As the day shift began and the medical facility came to life, Maria started her new role as both healer and protector. She had no idea that within 48 hours, those skills would be tested in ways she never imagined. Barnes regained consciousness that afternoon, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar secure wing where he had been moved. Maria was adjusting his fore when he tried to speak, producing only a raspy whisper through his damaged throat. "Easy," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't try to talk yet. Your vocal cords need time to heal." Barnes looked confused and frustrated, clearly wanting to communicate something important. Maria had anticipated this problem and pulled out a small whiteboard and marker. "You can write if you need to tell me something," she offered. With shaky hands, Barnes wrote, "Mission compromised. Enemy knew we were coming." Maria nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Master Chief Rodriguez briefed me. You're safe here. My job is to make sure you stay that way while you heal." Barnes studied her face, and she could see him processing the implications of her words. He wrote again, "Who else knows I'm here? Minimal staff. Colonel Mitchell, Master Chief Rodriguez, Dr. Patterson, and me. That's it." Maria checked his bandages as she spoke, noting that the swelling was already beginning to reduce. Over the next 24 hours, Maria fell into a routine that balanced medical care with security awareness. She monitored Barnes' condition constantly, but she also found herself noting details about everyone who entered their wing of the facility: the night janitor who cleaned the floors, the communications technician who serviced the medical equipment, the kitchen staff who delivered meals. Each person was cleared to be there, but Maria found herself memorizing faces and observing behavior patterns anyway. It was a skill she hadn't used in years, one that dated back to her time in Fallujah when identifying potential threats was a matter of survival. On the second night of her new assignment, Maria's vigilance paid off. She was checking on Barnes around 0200 hours when she noticed something that made her freeze. The security camera in the hallway had developed a small piece of tape over its lens, so small it would be easy to miss unless you were specifically looking for it. Maria's pulse quickened as she processed what this meant. Someone had deliberately disabled the camera, creating a blind spot in the security coverage. She reached for the communication device Rodriguez had given her, but before she could activate it, she heard soft footsteps in the corridor outside. Moving quickly but silently, Maria positioned herself near the door where she could see into the hallway through the small window. A figure in medical scrubs was approaching Barnes' room, but something was wrong. The person moved with the controlled, purposeful gait of someone with military training, not the hurried shuffle of medical personnel on a night shift. Maria's mind raced through her options. She could trigger the alarm, but that might cause the intruder to panic and become violent. She could try to radio for help, but the response time might be too long. Looking back at Barnes, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger approaching, Maria made her decision. She quietly opened the medical supply cabinet and retrieved a syringe filled with sedative. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. As the footsteps grew closer, Maria moved to the side of the door where she would be hidden when it opened. The door handle turned slowly, and Maria held her breath. The intruder entered the room with practiced stealth, moving directly toward Barnes' bed. In the dim light, Maria could see it was a man in surgical scrubs, but his hands were empty of medical equipment. Instead, he carried what looked like a small injection device. Maria didn't hesitate. She had learned in combat that survival often depended on acting first and asking questions later. She stepped out from behind the door and jabbed the syringe into the intruder's neck, depressing the plunger in one fluid motion. The man spun around, shock evident on his face as he realized he had walked into a trap. He was bigger than Maria and obviously trained in hand-to-hand combat, but the sedative was already taking effect. He swung wildly at her, but his coordination was rapidly deteriorating. "Who sent you?" Maria demanded in a harsh whisper, not wanting to wake Barnes if possible. The intruder's eyes were becoming unfocused, but he managed to pull a small radio from his pocket. Before he could use it, Maria grabbed his wrist and twisted until he dropped the device. The man collapsed to the floor, unconscious within seconds. Maria quickly activated her communication device. "Rodriguez, this is Santos. We have a problem. Secure room 7 now." The response was immediate. "On our way. 2 minutes." While she waited, Maria searched the unconscious intruder. He carried no identification, but she found the injection device he had planned to use on Barnes. The label was in a foreign script she didn't recognize, but she suspected it contained something far more lethal than medicine. Rodriguez arrived with 2 other SEALs, all armed and ready for action. They secured the unconscious intruder and quickly swept the area for additional threats. "Outstanding work, Doc," Rodriguez said quietly as they waited for intelligence personnel to arrive and process the scene. "You may have just saved Barnes' life and prevented a major intelligence breach." "How did they get on the base?" Maria asked, still shaken by how close the assassin had come to success. "We'll find out. But right now, I'm more interested in how you handled the situation. Where did you learn to move like that? To think tactically? Under pressure?" Maria realized she had revealed more about herself than she intended. Her quick professional response to the threat had demonstrated skills that weren't typically part of combat medic training. "I've been deployed to some rough places," she said carefully. "You learn to adapt." Rodriguez studied her with new interest. But before he could ask more questions, Barnes stirred on his bed. The commotion had finally awakened him, and his eyes widened as he took in the scene: armed SEALs, an unconscious stranger, and Maria standing over the man with the empty syringe still in her hand. Barnes reached for his whiteboard and wrote, "What happened?" "Someone tried to visit you who wasn't invited," Maria explained. "Don't worry about it. Just focus on getting better." As the intelligence team arrived to remove the would-be assassin, Maria realized that her cover as a simple combat medic was probably blown. Rodriguez's questions suggested he was beginning to suspect there was more to her background than her official record indicated. Later, after the excitement had died down and Barnes was resting comfortably, Rodriguez approached Maria again. "Doc, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. What's your real background? Because what I just saw wasn't standard medic training." Maria looked at the SEAL's weathered face and saw genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. She made a decision that would change everything about her deployment. "Before I was a medic," she said quietly, "I was something else. Something I'm not supposed to talk about." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I figured as much. The question is, can I trust you with the whole truth about why Barnes is really so important?" Maria realized she was being offered entry into a world she had left behind years ago. A world where the stakes were life and death, and where the difference between success and failure could affect national security. She thought about Barnes sleeping peacefully in the next room, alive only because she had been there when it mattered. "You can trust me," she said finally. "What do you need me to know?" Rodriguez led Maria to a secure briefing room in the base's intelligence section. The room was swept for listening devices daily and equipped with electronic countermeasures to prevent eavesdropping. As they settled into chairs around a small table, Rodriguez activated a device that would mask their conversation from any potential surveillance. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels," Rodriguez began. "Barnes isn't just a communications specialist. He's our primary intelligence liaison with a deep cover asset, who's been feeding us information about terrorist operations throughout the region." Maria absorbed this information without surprise. She had suspected Barnes was more than he appeared, given the extraordinary security measures surrounding his care. The mission that went wrong 2 days ago was supposed to be a routine extraction of intelligence materials from a dead drop site. But when we arrived, it was clear the enemy had been tipped off. They knew our exact route, our timing, even our radio frequencies. "Someone on our side is feeding information to the enemy," Maria concluded. "Exactly. And Barnes has been working with Colonel Mitchell's intelligence team to identify the leak. He was carrying encrypted communications from our asset when he was wounded. Information that could expose our source and get him killed." Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed Maria a series of photographs. "These are the people who have had access to our operational planning over the past 3 months. The traitor is somewhere in this group." Maria studied the faces, noting that several were high-ranking officers she recognized from around the base. The implications were staggering if someone at this level was compromised. It would explain how the enemy had been staying one step ahead of their operations. "Why are you telling me this?" Maria asked. "Because after tonight, you're part of the operation whether you like it or not. That assassin wasn't working alone, and they'll try again. We need Barnes conscious and debriefed before they make another attempt. His throat injury is still healing. Pushing him too hard could cause permanent damage." "I understand that, Doc, but if we don't get the information Barnes is carrying, a lot more people are going to die. Our asset has been providing intelligence that saved dozens of American lives over the past year." Maria felt the familiar weight of impossible choices that came with military service. Every decision carried life-and-death consequences, and there were rarely perfect solutions. "What do you need from me?" Rodriguez leaned forward. "We need you to accelerate Barnes' recovery using whatever medical means necessary. And we need you to help us set a trap for whoever sent that assassin tonight." Before Maria could respond, her communication device crackled to life. It was Colonel Mitchell's voice, urgent and concerned. "Rodriguez, Santos, report to the command center immediately. We have a situation." They hurried through the base's corridors to the command center, where they found Colonel Mitchell and several other officers huddled around a bank of computer monitors. The atmosphere was tense, and Maria could see that something significant had happened. "Sergeant Santos," Colonel Mitchell said without preamble, "we've identified the man who tried to kill Barnes tonight. His name is Viktor Petrov, a former Spetsnaz operative now working as a freelance assassin. But here's the concerning part. He was hired by someone with access to classified American intelligence." The colonel showed them a satellite photograph of a compound in the mountains near the Pakistani border. Our asset managed to get us this image before going dark. It shows a training facility where foreign operatives are being briefed on American Special Operations procedures. Someone is selling them detailed information about our tactics, equipment, and personnel. Maria stared at the photograph, noting the sophisticated communications equipment and the military precision of the facility's layout. This wasn't some amateur terrorist operation. It was a professional intelligence gathering and training center. Barnes was carrying the coordinates of this facility and the identity of our asset inside their organization, Rodriguez explained. If that information falls into the wrong hands, we lose our only source of intelligence about their operations. Sir, Maria said carefully, I can have Barnes ready to talk within 12 hours if I use experimental treatments to accelerate his healing. But there are risks. His voice might never fully recover. Colonel Mitchell considered this for a long moment. What would you recommend, Sergeant? I recommend we tell Barnes the situation and let him make the choice. He's the one who'll have to live with the consequences. 2 hours later, Maria found herself explaining the situation to Barnes in terms he could understand. She had given him a mild stimulant to help him stay alert, and his ability to communicate had improved significantly. The choice is yours, she concluded. I can use treatments that will get you talking clearly within hours, but your voice might never be the same. Or we can wait for natural healing, which could take weeks. Barnes considered this for several minutes, writing notes and questions on his whiteboard. Finally, he wrote, "Do it. Too many lives at stake." Maria nodded, respecting his decision even as she worried about the medical consequences. It's going to be painful. Are you sure? Barnes wrote, pain is temporary. Death is forever. As Maria prepared the experimental treatments, she reflected on the courage of the man in her care. He was risking permanent disability to protect an intelligence asset he had never met and to save lives of soldiers he would never know. It was the kind of selfless decision that reminded her why she had chosen military service. The treatment involved a combination of anti-inflammatory drugs, tissue growth stimulants, and localized nerve blocks that would allow Barnes to speak despite his injuries. The process was dangerous and largely untested, but it was their only option given the time constraints. Over the next 6 hours, Maria monitored Barnes carefully as the treatments took effect. His vital signs remained stable, and gradually his ability to speak returned. His voice was hoarse and limited in range, but he could communicate clearly enough to provide the intelligence Colonel Mitchell needed. The asset's name is Alexei Volkov, Barnes whispered during his debriefing. He's been undercover in their organization for 18 months. The coordinates I was carrying lead to their main training facility, but it's only operational for another 48 hours before they relocate. Colonel Mitchell leaned forward intently. What about the leak in our organization? Did Volkov identify the source? Barnes nodded weakly. He narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. The information is encrypted on a memory device I was carrying when I was shot. We didn't find any memory device in your equipment, Rodriguez said with concern. Barnes smiled grimly. That's because it's surgically implanted under the skin of my left shoulder. Volkov insisted on maximum security measures. Maria stared at Barnes in amazement. The man had been walking around with a piece of classified intelligence literally embedded in his body. No wonder the enemy had been so determined to capture or kill him. I'll need to perform a minor surgical procedure to retrieve the device, she told Colonel Mitchell. It can be done here under local anesthetic. As Maria prepared for the surgery that would finally provide the answers they needed, she couldn't help but admire Barnes' commitment to the mission. He had endured pain, risked his voice, and faced an assassination attempt, all to protect information that could save countless lives, but she also knew that retrieving the intelligence was only the first step. Once they identified the traitor in their midst, they would have to act quickly before the enemy realized their security had been compromised. And that would likely mean more danger for everyone involved, including herself. The surgical procedure to retrieve the memory device took place in the secure medical wing at 0400 hours, with only Maria, Dr. Patterson, and Colonel Mitchell present. Barnes remained conscious throughout the procedure, refusing general anesthesia, so he could provide immediate assistance if there were complications accessing the device. Maria made a precise incision in Barnes' left shoulder, following the scar tissue from what appeared to be an old combat wound. The memory device was smaller than she had expected, about the size of a grain of rice and sealed in a biocompatible capsule that had been designed to avoid detection by medical scanners. "Got it," Maria announced quietly, carefully extracting the device and placing it in a sterile container. The entire procedure had taken less than 15 minutes, but she could see the exhaustion in Barnes' eyes as she closed the incision. Colonel Mitchell immediately took possession of the device, connecting it to a secure laptop computer that had been isolated from all networks. As the encrypted data loaded, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Jesus," he muttered, scrolling through the intelligence reports from their deep cover asset. "Volkov has been documenting everything: training schedules, operational plans, personnel assignments. This is a complete picture of enemy intelligence operations in the region." But it was the final section of the data that caused Mitchell to go pale. The list of 3 suspected traitors within American intelligence included names that stunned everyone in the room. "One of them is Major Sarah Chun from Base Intelligence," Mitchell said quietly. "She's had access to every operational plan for the past 8 months. Maria felt a chill as she recognized the name. Major Chun had visited the medical facility several times over the past week, ostensibly to check on the wounded SEALs. But now Maria realized she might have been gathering intelligence about Barnes' condition and security arrangements. The other 2 suspects are Colonel Williams from Special Operations Command and Captain Martinez from Communications, Mitchell continued. All 3 have the access and opportunity to have leaked operational information. Rodriguez studied the intelligence carefully. Volkov's analysis suggests the traitor has been active for at least 6 months. That corresponds with when our operations started going wrong consistently. As they processed this information, Barnes struggled to speak through his damaged voice. "There's more," he whispered hoarsely. Volkov said the enemy is planning something big. A coordinated attack on multiple American facilities in the region. The details are in the encrypted files. Mitchell worked quickly to decode the additional intelligence, and what he found made the situation even more urgent. According to this, they're planning to hit 3 forward operating bases simultaneously within the next 72 hours, including this one. The implications were staggering. If the enemy knew about their security arrangements and defensive capabilities through their embedded source, the attacks would be devastating. Hundreds of American personnel would be at risk. "We need to act on this information immediately," Rodriguez said. "But first we have to identify which of the 3 suspects is actually working for the enemy." Maria had an idea, though it would require her to put herself at considerable risk. "What if we set a trap? Feed each suspect different false information and see which version makes its way to the enemy?" Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That could work. But we'd need to make the false information believable and time-sensitive enough to force the traitor to act quickly." Over the next hour, they developed a plan that would test each suspect simultaneously. They would provide Major Chun with false information about Barnes being transferred to a different medical facility. Colonel Williams would be told that a rescue operation was being planned for their compromised asset. Captain Martinez would receive fabricated intelligence about a counterattack on the enemy training facility. The key is monitoring communications to see which piece of false information gets transmitted to enemy forces. Mitchell explained. "We have surveillance capabilities that can track all outgoing communications from the base." Maria's role in the plan was to act as the conduit for the false medical information to Major Chun. She would need to convincingly portray Barnes as being in critical condition and requiring immediate evacuation to a specialized facility. "Are you comfortable with this level of deception?" Mitchell asked her. If Chun is our traitor, she realized she's been set up once the plan is executed. You could become a target. Maria looked at Barnes, who was resting quietly after the surgical procedure but still alert enough to follow the conversation. His sacrifice to protect the intelligence asset and prevent future attacks had demonstrated the kind of courage she aspired to in her own service. "I'm in," she said firmly. "What do you need me to do?" The plan was set in motion that same morning. Maria began by updating Barnes' medical chart to reflect a sudden deterioration in his condition, citing complications from the experimental treatment she had administered. She then requested an urgent consultation with Major Chun. Explaining that Barnes might need immediate evacuation for specialized care, Major Chun arrived at the medical facility within an hour, her concern appearing genuine as she reviewed Barnes' fabricated medical reports. Maria played her role perfectly, expressing worry about Barnes' declining vital signs and the possibility of permanent vocal cord damage. "Dr. Patterson thinks he needs surgery that we can't perform." "Here," Maria explained to Chung. "We're looking at medical evacuation to Germany within the next 24 hours. Chun took detailed notes about the planned evacuation timeline and asked specific questions about security arrangements for the transfer. Her questions seemed reasonable for someone responsible for intelligence coordination, but Maria noticed she was particularly interested in details about transportation routes and timing. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and Colonel Mitchell were implementing their own aspects of the plan with the other suspects. All 3 pieces of false information had been distributed by noon, and now they had to wait to see which version would be intercepted by enemy communications. The answer came sooner than expected. By 1400 hours, intercepted enemy radio traffic revealed that hostile forces were mobilizing to intercept a medical evacuation flight that matched exactly the false information given to Major Chun. "She's our traitor," Mitchell announced grimly as he reviewed the intelligence reports. "The enemy is moving assets to ambush a medical flight that doesn't exist." The revelation was both satisfying and troubling. Major Chun had been in a position to compromise numerous operations, and her betrayal had likely cost American lives. But now they faced the challenge of apprehending her without alerting the enemy that their source had been discovered. "We need to arrest her immediately," Rodriguez said. "But we also need to use her to feed false information back to her handlers about our knowledge of their planned attacks." The arrest was carried out quietly that evening. Major Chun was taken into custody during what appeared to be a routine security meeting, with cover story that she was being questioned about administrative irregularities. The real interrogation would take place in a secure facility off the base dot as news of Chun's arrest spread through the intelligence community. Maria finally allowed herself to feel some relief. Barnes was recovering well from both his combat injuries and the surgical procedure to extract the intelligence device. The immediate threat to his life had been neutralized, and the broader security breach had been identified and contained, but the mission wasn't over yet. The intelligence Barnes had carried revealed that their deep cover asset, Alexei Volkov, was still in extreme danger. Enemy forces would soon realize that their security had been compromised, and Volkov's life would be forfeit unless he could be extracted quickly. 3 days later, Maria received word that a successful rescue operation had brought Volkov safely to American custody. The enemy training facility had been destroyed in a precision airstrike, and the planned attacks on American bases had been disrupted. Barnes made a full recovery, though his voice retained a distinctive hoarse quality that would remind him forever of his sacrifice for the mission. Before leaving for reassignment, he visited Maria one final time. "I never properly thanked you," he said, his damaged voice still barely above a whisper. "Not just for the medical care, but for everything else. Rodriguez told me about how you handled that assassin." Maria felt uncomfortable with the praise, as she always did. "I was just doing my job." Barnes smiled. "No, you weren't. You went way beyond your job description. My wife and daughters are going to see me again because of you." As Barnes left the medical facility for the last time, Maria reflected on the strange turn her deployment had taken. She had volunteered for a routine assignment as a combat medic and ended up playing a crucial role in a counterintelligence operation that had saved countless lives, Master Chief Rodriguez approached as she was finishing her paperwork. You know, Doc, Colonel Mitchell has recommended you for a commendation. But more than that, he's asked me to give you something. Rodriguez handed her an envelope containing orders for a new assignment. Maria opened it with curiosity and found herself reading about an opportunity to join a specialized medical unit that supported special operations forces worldwide. It's not a typical medic,